So Juan Pablo Contreras, I'm glad that we could have some time to talk about your sound investment project for Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, Lucha Libre. And I'm wondering, at what point in the sound investment process did you come up with the idea of composing a work that celebrated Lucha Libre? And if so, why?
Excellent question. First of all, thank you so much for this interview. I'm really excited to speak with you. I had this idea, I would say even like 10 years ago, when I had an opera company approach me and asked me to write an opera. My first thought was Lucha Libre is a perfect depiction of what it's like to go to an opera. It's something that's kind of rehearsed and staged, but at the same time really can bring in fans together, and people go to watch these performers because they're doing impossible things on stage. And after working with Leiko on a couple of smaller commissions, I wrote something for a piano quintet and started to really get to know the orchestra. And I was offered this amazing opportunity to be the sound investment composer. I thought about how the program is laid out, where you have 3 or 4 meetings with the sound investors, people who are interested in learning about the creative process of a composer. And these happen every, let's say, 3 months, culminating with the premiere of the work. So I knew I was going to get the opportunity to really get to share my creative process with people and bring them into what it's like to be a composer. And I thought this topic, Lucha Libre, would be really great because I'll have the time to really share it with people and almost, allow us to get to know these characters, get them to know about what Lucha Libre is all about. And I thought this was the perfect opportunity to do so. And honestly, I think I was right, because we really, the whole gang, the whole group of investors and Leiko followers, we got really collectively very excited about Lucha Libre. We ended up purchasing like 50 masks that people are gonna wear in the premiere. So it became something bigger than the piece itself, which for a composer, it's really exciting because our profession tends to be very lonely. We're always just writing, maybe using a piano and writing notes, and then all of a sudden you show up with an orchestra and are like, it feels like you're crashing a party with 100 people. So I love how Leiko has created this program that allows composers to be a part of the fabric of the orchestra and just get to know them in a deeper level and make the process of writing for orchestra more intimate. So I thought, honestly, this piece wouldn't have happened if it weren't for this opportunity. And I thought it was the right time to write this orchestral piece, Lucha Libre.
Now, growing up in Guadalajara, was Lucha Libre something that was important to you as a kid?
Yes, very important. And it was almost like these were our superheroes. So rather than watching like Batman movies, you dreamed about going and watching like El Santo or Blue Demon, but with the opportunity of eventually doing so in person. So it's like the real superhero, getting to meet him on a fight. So I remember I even had like little action figures that were luchadores, and so it's really interesting, yeah, how it's more than just a spectacle. It's almost like something that, as kids, and I think even adults, we kind of look up to these luchadores and kind of aspire, or they really reflect a lot of things also about Mexican culture, which is something that interested me in merging the two of like classical music and Lucha Libre. And the idea that I had, bringing back this idea of superheroes, is that to me, you go to a classical music concert to see something impossible happen on stage. Like there's a group of musicians coming together, choreographing something that is very intricate, where everyone is playing at the top of their game, and you're almost there to see if like someone makes a mistake or what's going to happen. No? It's that exciting. And I think that's the connection that I made with Lucha Libre. Everything is choreographed, everything is planned out. It's an act that they put for the people to enjoy. And so that was kind of what inspired me to mirror that in the classical stage.
I do have to say, though, that I don't go to a classical music concert hoping to hear a mistake. I hope for perfection, but maybe that's just me.
But that's the excitement, no? that it's almost going to happen. It's something so complex and so intricate that you're like, are they going to make it or not? Is this going to sound good or not? For me, I do feel that kind of excitement of what's going to happen, especially when you have like a soloist on stage or something like that, where the complexity is just at another level, and it's really exciting. No?
Now, you made a comparison to superheroes. With Batman, we know that it's Bruce Wayne.
Yes.
For instance, we know that it's Clark Kent behind Superman, but Lucha Libre really relies on complete anonymity, and that you really don't know. And in fact, El Santo passed away a week after he, for the first time, revealed who he was.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how much does the idea of keeping one's identity private or secret factor into the work that you wrote?
Wow, that's an amazing question. Wow, no, I'm speechless. That is such a good question. I think, well, one thing that I built into the composition was, I'm gonna have, just as it happens in Lucha Libre, I'm gonna have two teams, three rudos, which are like the villains, and three técnicos, which are like the good guys. And what I did is I geographically chose the players to be soloists within the orchestra, but that would face each other. For example, the concertmaster and the principal cello, the piano and the trumpet, and the flute and the timpani, so that we would have like three on each team and facing each other. And one of the decisions I made was, there's going to be a winning team. So part of what's fun about listening to the pieces, you'll get introduced to each of these characters by listening to their theme, because when you go to a Lucha Libre match, what happens is they enter the arena one by one, and you hear the music that is associated with the luchador. So what I did is I wrote 6 different themes for each fighter. So the piece starts with us listening to the themes, and then you're gonna hear the themes fighting each other, 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, and eventually 3 versus 3, where all of the themes are kind of fighting on top of each other, and there's a winner. So I think, in the traditional Lucha Libre, or a lot of the matches, what they're gambling is, if you lose, you need to reveal your identity. That's kind of the gamble that some of the fights agree on. So that would be the connection that I make, that you will be able, if you listen to this piece, you will be able to see or hear who are the winners, and maybe that's kind of the fun part of it.
And do the good guys stay the good guys the whole time, and the bad guys stay the bad guys the whole time, or is there any kind of betrayal?
Historically, I think there has been switches between teams, but what really drew me and continues to draw me about Lucha Libre is that it's not like people consider the rudos, the bad guys, like to be like mean or anything. Like, they're very charismatic, and actually the way you improve your ranking in Lucha Libre is how likable you are and how much people like you. So it's not how many matches you win, but how popular you are. So it happens that a lot of the the legendary rudos like Blue Demon are they don't represent evil per se, but they are just a part of a different team, but they're equally liked. Or often people just go to the Lucha Libre to just scream and don't really root for anyone specifically, but are just there to enjoy themselves.
For obvious reasons, for anybody who knows Lucha Libre, mentioning El Santo and Blue Diamond makes a lot of sense. So would it be fair to assume that those are 2 of the 6 popular figures that you chose to be part of the architecture of this work?
They were inspired by those 2, but what I ended up doing was we created new characters, and we had a mask maker in San Diego. Well, actually, my wife designed the masks, and we had a mask maker in San Diego make new masks that are going to be premiered by the Lake Orchestra. So we made kind of our new characters, obviously inspired by some Mexican legends, and definitely the rivalry between El Santo and Blue Demon was like one of those inspirations, because they really depict the good and evil that was very historic. And I mean, they made like 60 movies together. It was something really big in the early 80s and 90s in Mexico.
And for those who are interested, you'll probably be selling versions of that available in the at the Ambassador Auditorium.
Eventually there's a lot of surprises that we have planned, and there's a lot of artwork that we're also putting together. So definitely it's gonna be interesting and more of a spectacle, which I think ties in perfectly with what Lucha Libre is.
Since most competition, there's the team you root for, there's the team you root against, there's the good guy, there's the bad guy. You know, people look at competition as a way of looking at an analogy for good and evil. Is there anything bigger that you want to say about the nature of good and evil vis-a-vis this composition?
Excellent question. I think my main interest, and especially in having this opportunity to interact with the LACO sound investors, so in such a deep level with this composition process, the main question that I wanted to ask was to have people ask themselves, like, what is my personal identity? Like, who would I root for? Or what kind of mask would I put on? So in really speaking about the different characters, we really kind of discussed what are some of the things that they represent. For instance, there's one character called La Calva, like the skull, that represents death and kind of the view that Mexicans have about death, which is kind of more joyful, and it's more of a celebration of life. So more than thinking about good and evil or good and bad, I think, and again, what I would love for people to think about when they're hearing this piece and hearing the different themes, it is that question of, like, what if I had to root for someone, who would I root for? What kind of mask would I design for myself? Like, what are some of the things that I value most about my upbringing and my identity, which I think has been a thread that has been present in all of my music, which tends to celebrate Mexican culture and Mexican roots. Sometimes the stories that I tell are very local. A piece about mariachi, which was invented in Guadalajara, where I'm from. But I think when you speak about things that are so personal, they become more universal, and people start to really think about their own kind of upbringing and traditions and things that they celebrate. So yeah, I think it's more on that end. I was thinking about what is the identity and what kind of luchador would you be? That would be my question.
Well, so if we're going to talk about the masks and identity, what does this work allow us, or how does this work allow us to unmask who you are, not just as a composer, but who you are as a human being?
Amazing question again. I think I am someone who's really making a strong effort, but in a not in a forced way, but in a really enjoyable way, I would say, to make classical music more fun and more accessible for everyone, and especially the Latino communities. I really want to bring the people who I identify most with, which are Latinos and Mexicans, to have them feel excited about going to a classical music concert, and to it almost sounds really very out there and very extravagant to have a piece about lucha libre, but I think it's the perfect way to introduce people to certain instruments as well. So the fact that I chose 6 different instruments within the orchestra and having them be kind of featured and almost like soloists in the piece also allows people to get to know these instruments in a more intimate level, and just to change the switch that I think sometimes we have this expectation that classical music is something very serious that you can't really laugh about, or there's no joy, and it's more about the precision of making the music. And to me, it has always been about the excitement of having 40 or 100 people on stage making music together, and that the type of colors and energy that ensemble can emanate. So I think that's Lucha Libre. What it tells you about me is that I'm trying to really, for one, scream Mexico with my music and really bring it to the fore with how I'm writing my music, and at the same time just giving permission both to the performers as well. I think orchestra musicians really enjoy it when they can play something fun that is rhythmic, that is colorful, and at the same time also for audience members to say, like, this is much, this genre is very much alive, and there's music that is very exciting and relatable as well. So I think that even the masks thing makes it more something that you can identify with, but at the same time there's a new spin, which is integrating it with the classical medium.
It also seems like it's an opportunity to get youth interested in music as well by using this piece and the way you've designed it.
And something else, definitely something else that we're doing in the performance is that before we play I think the piece is like 12 or 13 minutes long, we're first going to isolate and just play the theme of each of the characters. So basically like introduce, and I'll say a few words on stage, like what does this character represent? You'll hear the theme so that you can get to know these luchadores and these musicians, and then you can experience the whole lucha libre fight and be able to identify who's competing against who and how are the teams interacting with each other. So it's going to be more dynamic and a little, again, with this vision of making classical music more approachable and more something that is more of a community experience.
Now, you told Strings Magazine in a fairly recent interview that each one of my works is in some way a self-portrait of what I'm experiencing at that specific point in my life. How does Lucha Libre serve as that self-portrait for you right now?
One of my recent memories before I wrote the piece was I was in Mexico City working with the National Symphony, and I went to a kind of like a fancy restaurant, and I was having lunch, and in came this luchador wearing his mask and wearing a three-piece suit, so like very formal, and he had lunch with some, I don't know, very important people, and had lunch with his mask on. And that to me was like so shocking. I felt like this is real. Like this is amazing how how serious this lucha libre thing is taken in Mexico, and how as you say, the identity is everything. So they really conceal it and do a big effort doing so. So I think it does coincide with a rekindling of my interest for lucha libre. And then what I did was I went to several matches or luchas, both in Mexico City and in Guadalajara, where I'm from, with an expert who was kind of telling me, because I knew kind of the general rules and everything, but he was really telling me all about the more intricate stuff and the details that you sometimes don't think about. For instance, I learned that they get paid very little money. It's like $200 or something for the match. So it's interesting to think like they almost do it for the love of being a luchador, no? And in terms of more musical terms, something that I wanted to do is I wanted to really use this opportunity to celebrate the players in Leiko and to write music that featured 6 of them within the orchestra, and that made my music, or the way the piece works, it has this chamber music mentality, which I think that Leiko really does better than most orchestras. You really feel that they're playing together because they know each other very closely. So I wanted to use that and not just write like a big orchestra piece, but write something that really allowed melodies and players to interact with each other in a more chamber-like context. So I guess every piece you write is a new challenge of something that you want to explore. And in this case, it was this idea of like, how can I champion these musicians, but at the same time write something that is like nothing that I've written before as well.
Because of the pandemic, this world premiere was postponed.
Yes.
Now, I've spoken to a lot of composers who have thought, you know what, I guess I have a little bit more time. Maybe I should revisit this. Maybe there are different ideas that I should bring to the work. Have you revisited it since it was meant to debut, and in that downtime made any changes to the work that's going to now be presented?
Excellent question again. There were two things that I did. The piece itself, I pretty much left untouched, but I did think about the opportunity of creating our own masks. So that was something new. Originally, we were just going to use some of the characters and the masks that were inspired by the Lucha Libre legends. But that was an opportunity of like, okay, we have a little bit more time. Why not like invent our own identities and think about, creating these illustrations where you get the luchador with their mask, but holding the instrument, stuff like that. That was more kind of creative. And the second thing was I isolated the theme. So I wrote the 12-minute piece, but then I created like a suite of 6 movements, which is the 6 themes of each of the luchadores. And that took a little bit of work in terms of just like putting a bow on each of the themes and making it like a standalone movement. So I guess I created a companion piece that is what I would love for orchestras to do before they play the piece, which is let me introduce the luchadores, let's hear their theme, and then listening to the whole thing. Honestly, I'm just so grateful that Leico is playing it, because I didn't know if it was going to be reprogrammed, because I understand, a couple of years went by and a lot of orchestras had to kind of keep going with some of their future ideas and future commitments. So it was, and also I had the incredible privilege of having them commission and premiere the new arrangement that I made of my piece Mariachi Tlan for the Disney Hall concert that they played. So I didn't expect it to be programmed, and it was wonderful to hear, a few months ago, like, yes, we have a space for it, and that it's happening. And it was the first, as you said, it was the first concert that Leico had to cancel because of the pandemic. So we're here, and yeah, it's very exciting.
Well, we know one of the things that you did during your downtime during the pandemic, because you're a new father.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, now that you have a son, that's part of your life, how do you anticipate that this whole experience is going to influence what your priorities are as a composer and how you see the world?
Great question, and I can't wait to explore it. I think one thing that I have been thinking about, and Lucha Libre kind of has that didactic element ingrained in it, in the case that it serves as a piece that can also show you how the orchestra works, like have the audience pay more attention as to who's sitting where, what instruments are playing in what side of the stage. Especially what are these 6 instruments like, and especially I chose some instruments that are not your typical soloist. For instance, timpani is rarely featured as a soloist. Piano in the orchestral context is also kind of rare, or flute. So I have been thinking about it, like maybe writing a few more pieces that can really show someone new, or someone who's experiencing orchestral music for the first time, kind of showcasing or writing something that has also that educational component of like, let's meet the orchestra for the first time, which I think, yeah, Lucha Libre has a little bit of that, but it's something that I have been thinking about that might happen a bit more in future pieces. Yeah, as an opportunity to kind of share that with my son.
Well, you also have an opportunity vis-a-vis the Vilcek Foundation Prize, which you were just awarded.
Yeah.
How much freedom does that give you to write what you want, as opposed to what a commissioning organization may want you to do?
That was a huge honor. I attended the award ceremony in New York, and I still feel like overwhelmed with what a huge honor it was, even though I applied for the prize, so it wasn't like a complete surprise when I got a call, because I knew about it, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to apply as well, because each year they changed the category of the arts. So I think it had been 8 years since they awarded a prize in music. So it was like kind of something that kind of aligned. And what's amazing about that prize is that it's just gives you complete freedom. They don't expect any work in exchange of winning the award. It's more of a recognition of being an immigrant and in the United States, and kind of with your work offering something positive to the country, which also is incredibly special. Like I never thought I would be thanked for being an immigrant, and even in particularly this year when I became a US citizen. I think back in April I became American after 15 years of living here. So that aligned with the birth of my son, who is American now, and receiving that prize has been um, incredibly special. And now with this premiere with Leico, so yeah, I'm really excited. And most importantly, I think being recognized for living in the States and writing classical music that's inspired by Mexico, which is my native country, is such a rare combination of things. Like I came here to study composition and to kind of take in the American kind of education as to how to orchestrate and how to write, but I never lost sight of my roots, and it's very special to be recognized for doing that. So yeah, we'll see what I write. I'm not sure what will come next.
Yeah, three years ago, you told Voyage LA that you're constantly competing with both composers who are dead as well as living composers.
Yes.
And you cited Mozart and Beethoven for obvious reasons, because the whole world compares everything to Mozart and Beethoven. But I'm wondering, as somebody from Mexico, what influence does a composer like Revueltas have on you, and how deep, is his legacy in your mind as a contemporary classical composer from Mexico?
Very, very deep and very present, and kind of challenging as well, because sometimes just because of the fact that I also, maybe in a new way, but I'm attempting to combine classical music with Mexican music, but popular or folk, whatever it is, I sometimes immediately get that comparison, or like, oh, so you're like Revueltas, or you're like Carlos Chavez, or you're like Moncayo, and it's like, they are like my inspiration, but I'm trying to do something new. I think I embrace it. I think thanks to their legacy, I'm being able to explore things in my music that are combining my roots with the classical medium. But at the same time, I think I remember that almost exactly 10 years ago, I had like my first big break, which was that I won the BMI William Schumann Prize with an orchestral piece. So I was able to kind of say, here's my validation that I can write orchestra music. And within a year, I had like 10 performances of that piece in the States and Latin America. And a lot of people, that are famous in Mexico as composers, they were telling me like, no, you can't be writing music that's influenced by Mexico. Like, that's not the trend right now. You should be writing something that's more European, new complexity, like more notes and kind of noises. And I was like, but this is really what I want to say with my music. Like, I don't see why it should be prohibited almost, no? So I'm lucky that I have stayed in my lane and really just continue to explore ways to write music that is Mexican in nature. And I think the evidence or the real prize that I could tell you that I've gotten is that my music is frequently played, and I've been really able to enjoy so many great performances. So yes, I'm part of a legacy, but I'm trying to plant a new flower in the garden. No.
Well, good. Well, that leads me to the last thing that I wanted to ask you, which is something that I was surprised to see that The Guardian, a publication out of England, wrote about El Santo in 2016. And they said El Santo was more than just a wrestler. He was a Mexican hero who not only elevated the reputation of Lucha Libre, but became immortalized as a Latin symbol of power and heroism. How would you like to change the conversation about what contemporary classical music can be as, both a Mexican and now an American citizen? What does success look like for you in your career to have elevated the reputation of classical music born out of Mexico?
I have to applaud your questions. They're really, really good.
Thank you.
I would say, and this is not something that starts with me. I think it's something that I was able to enjoy myself, which is just the fact of being to being able to meet someone that looks like you or that has your same heritage, and someone that has made it, whatever that means, have some professional opportunities, changes the ball game completely. And for me, that was 15 years ago when I moved to the US. I wanted actually move to LA with the intention of eventually becoming a film composer, because I thought that was the only way I could write for the orchestra. And I met Daniel Catan, who was a fantastic Mexican opera composer. And he was almost like the first living composer that I met. And I couldn't believe, like, you're alive and you can write music for the concert stage and operas, like new music. And that changed everything to me. Like, it put me in a path where I just a switch, was turned on, where, like, yes, you can be a composer. So I think just that kind of exposure and just showing not only audiences but also future generations of Mexican Americans or Latino composers, people that are interested in music, just having them see, like, oh, there's someone that has a similar upbringing to me that is actually a composer, that changes the ballgame completely. So I think, yes, it's representation. It's allowing different voices also have a shot of being a part of the programming with orchestras. And I think most importantly, and again, I really applaud this from Leico, which I've worked with and known for the past 5 or 6 years, is that they not only like commission a piece from a composer who just visits and then goes back home. They really invest in the relationship with the composer, something that's longer term, and something, bringing in a composer so that they're a part of the orchestra. Because I think that's also something important. If people can recognize and get used to the fact that, oh, actually composers exist, I just met one yesterday at a concert, they're going to be more open to saying, like, well, then I'd maybe like to listen to more new music, because I know that it's made by real people that I've had conversations with. And I think also as composers, it is kind of our job to, be a little bit more social and just, put ourselves out there and get to know, the audience. I think sometimes as classical music institutions or organizations, we have this idea that as long as our programming is great, we're going to fill the halls and there's nothing else we need to do. Like, you program those Beethoven symphonies that you were mentioning, and we're doing our jobs, And I think that is not it. That is not the way to go. I think you need to really think about the audience and bring them in and make them a part of the experience so that your organization can thrive. And I think in bringing that audience in, having them interact and get to know a composer, which is exactly what sound investment is about, that's the way to change the culture and to just make it, more common or more traditional that, yes, I'm going to a classical music concert. It's going to include at least one piece by a living composer and then something from the repertoire, and just have people be more interested in that. Yeah.
Well, thankfully, I assume you're still in Los Angeles.
Yes.
So thankfully, you and I are both in a city where we have a major symphony orchestra that does exactly that.
Yes, absolutely. And
So,
it makes the world difference, no? To just have that. It's like going to a temple where you have that opportunity to really interact with the music and see it come to life, which I also think is really exciting.
Terrific. Well, I appreciate your taking the time to talk about Lucha Libre. Are you all right with my posting this conversation on our YouTube channel?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for your questions. Just opened my brain, and thank you for thinking about of such thoughtful questions and really tying in Lucha Libre in a more deep level, and how it's going to play a big role in the premiere of my piece as well. So I really appreciate it.